Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 159 of Humanity Rising. I trust you all had a restful and healthy and safe holidays. As you know, we took a break on December 11th, and here we are, January 11th, 2021. And it feels very good to be in the new year. It's worth noting as we begin that it was exactly 1 year ago this week that the first reports came out of Wuhan, China, that there was this virus that initially most of us didn't pay much attention to because we'd heard of various viruses before, the bird flu and the Ebola virus and SARS, and they had kind of caused a little concern, but then seemed to just pass away. And then all of a sudden, the virus spread globally, and the rest, as they say, has been history. It's also worth noting that 1 year ago this week, the impeachment proceedings, the first impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump, were introduced in the House of Representatives of the United States. So here we are, the second week of January, and what a year it has been. That virus, the coronavirus, referred to also as COVID-19, stopped our world and put all of us under some form of lockdown, compelled us to embrace urgently a new social meme that we never even heard about before: social distancing, walking around our communities, staying 6 feet apart and wearing masks. Our economies were essentially shut down. And people the world over were forced, for the first time in human history, to undergo the same experience at the same time, which had the effect, among many, many other things, of putting us all in the same conversation. It was observed by many. It was almost as if nature sent the virus and shut us down and sent us all to our rooms, put us in isolation for a while. It said, think about what you're doing to the environment, to each other, to yourselves. And somehow or other, we didn't learn our lesson because the virus has persisted. And is emerging into 2021 stronger than it's ever been. And all of us are dealing with it in various ways. Vaccinations are being rolled out worldwide. We'll see the effect that they may or may not have over the next months. People have adjusted, but people are exhausted. Governments are still groping for what it is it best to do, because whether you were a country like South Korea or Taiwan that did really well last spring, countries all over are still grappling with a little microbe that has proven itself to be extraordinarily intelligent and adaptive and resilient and pernicious. So how the human race is going to navigate its way through 2021 remains to be seen. In the midst of all that, last May, Ubiquity University and partners from all over the world, over 300 partners from all over the world came together to provide a common ground, a global commons, a sacred space, so that people worldwide could just simply come together virtually. We couldn't touch each other physically, but thank God for Zoom. We could come together virtually and form the intimacy of community by other means. And at first, we weren't sure what we were even doing. We were just trying somehow to respond, knowing that the crisis was really an opportunity. And like St. John of the Cross, you know, the opening lines of the Dark Night of the Soul, I went out without discerning and with nothing to guide me except that which in my heart was burning. That's what we felt when we launched Humanity Rising. And I must say, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. To reach out and to find friends and colleagues all over the world. We've had over 800 speakers, thousands of people on our Ubiverse, our social platform, hundreds of partnering organizations, and we're still growing. As I look back over the months since we launched on the 22nd of May, there have been two themes that I want to just note very, very briefly, and then commence our program, that have created, I think, the tonality of Humanity Rising. The first one that began to emerge on opening night, on our first session, was the urgent, personal, and collective importance of coherence. It was very clear, very early, that we were in a raging sea of chaos. And this pandemic was a centrifugal force that was splitting us asunder. And therefore, the most important thing we could do energetically was create islands of coherence. Humanity Rising, when all is said and done, is simply seeking to become an island of coherence in the sea of chaos. And if you know the work of Ilya Prigogine, the Nobel laureate in chemistry, who talked about chaos theory, he was the one that really observed that in the midst of chaos, there is order. Order undergirds chaos. And that if in the midst of the chaos, you can create an island of coherence, trim tabbing with the chaos, you can create a higher order coherence that becomes so refined and so intense that at a certain moment, the chaos rises and is reconfigured as a new coherence. That's what we're doing here. And it's been a beautiful, beautiful exercise. The second tonality for Humanity Rising has been the emerging importance of regeneration. We are past the time for sustainability, for adaptation. Scientists worldwide are telling us that we are running out of time to get our affairs in order. and renew our relationship with each other and with the larger ecology, or we could lose the world as we know it. And the decade of the 2020s, the next 10 years, are going to determine the fate of humanity on this earth. So we are alive, my friends, at potentially the most important moment in the long history of humankind on planet Earth. Every decision we make counts, because if there's one thing the pandemic has made clear, is that there is no more neutral ground. All of us are in this together, and it's together that we can now move in such a way that we regenerate who we are, what we're doing, and thereby reshape the basic relationships that constitute the human community and the relationship between humanity and the larger eco field within which we have such an integral place. One of the most inspiring examples of regeneration came out of Amsterdam in the month of May, where they said, given the pandemic, they were going to embrace donut economics and put human well-being at the center, and the eco field, the larger environment, as the outer ring. Beautiful image of the donut. We were inspired by that. 50% of the entire human race lives in cities. 90% of the people in the developed world live in cities. And so we thought, what better way to launch ourselves into 2021 with a regenerative ethos and impulse than to celebrate our cities. And so we turned to Marilyn Hamilton, who you all know. She's been on the sessions multiple times, lives in Findhorn, is the founder of Integral Cities, and has been working to revitalize cities for a very, very long time. And her partner, Beth Sanders, who is the president of Populous Planning, that assists cities in getting their affairs in order in a way that can ensure their cities can thrive. She's the author of Nest City, how citizens can save cities and how cities can serve citizens. But before I turn it over to Marilyn and Beth, we want to take a moment and just enter in whatever way you can, a moment of coherence. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. And place your attention on your heart. Listen, if you can, to your heartbeat. In a spirit of gratitude that at this moment, when everything is at stake, you're alive. And you can help shape the future. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart, full of gratitude for each and every one of you, I want to turn the program now over to my good friend, Marilyn Hamilton and Beth Sanders. Marilyn, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Happy New Year. It's so wonderful to be here with you. And hi, Beth. So glad that you're partnering with me. We are spread across the world. Jim is in San Francisco, as you can see from his link. I'm in Findhorn, Scotland, and Beth is in Edmonton, Canada. And we've gathered here this week, which we've called Cities Rising for a Regenerative World, to convene a group of reflective practitioners to consider why the city is actually Gaia's reflective organ. That's what I believe. My work has taken me into, as Jim has said, creating an integral city meshwork for an organization that is touching on reframing cities as living, evolutionary, integral systems. And I tend to have a big picture, a big meta, and I like to work with Beth, who has a very different approach. She uses all the same frameworks, but she brings life into the city because, as Jim said, her work is calling the citizens to serve cities and cities to serve citizens. So together we have a kind of a fractal in the way that we work together. And so I'd like to introduce the week. I'm going to share a screen just to give you a little visual. And then we're going to call on the reflective practitioners who have joined us today. So let me just share my screen. So, Cities Rising for a Regenerative World. It sounds like a great title for a good film. And some of you are filmmakers who are here this week, so you'll want a good plot. We have a plot for the week that is about looking at how to experience your city and community as a dynamic, living, evolutionary system. We want you to see that there are opportunities for you to reflect, and that you can also discover, as Beth will help us find out, how we can serve our cities and communities, and that they can best serve you. So together we will serve the well-being of our planet Gaia. I should just comment that when we say cities, we're talking about all sizes of human habitats. And those human habitats mean that we are looking at villages all the way through to megalopolises. So if we have that plot for the week, what are we going to be doing each day? Well, here's just a quick overview, and we'll zoom back into Monday and start us off there. So today we're going to look at how do we activate cities at scale. As I just mentioned, we look at human hives or human habitats at scales where we think no matter how big or how small, we can activate agency. Tomorrow, we're going to engage in living cities and looking at them as complex adaptive systems, and know that they have consciousness and culture in addition to behaviors and infrastructure. On Wednesday, we're looking at governance, but through the lens of life cycle patterns. And we want to see what happens when we practice governance with local conditions and needs in mind. And in fact, this heart coherence, creating islands of coherence and islands of calm, is very much a part of how we think this is possible for city governance to emerge. On Thursday, we are going to look at practicing mutual agencies. We think cities are living systems of mutual agency, and they're a survival skill, is how Beth describes them. And then Friday, we will be integrating what we've been doing for the whole week, coming back to coherence for regenerativity. So there we have the week, and what we're planning to do today is to think about activating cities at scale. Now, I'd like to introduce our practitioners in a special way. About 1990 or so, one of the world's leading systems thinkers, Donella Meadows, actually asked herself, what does the world look like if we were just a 1,000-person village? If we fast forward to today, this is being examined by an organization that actually calls itself 100people.org. And they've updated those 1990 statistics so we could look at what if the world were 100 people. We would have 50-50 females and males. We would have many different belief systems. 25 of us would be children, 75 would be adults, and of those adults, 9 of them would be 65 and older. We would have 60 Asians, 16 Africans, 14 people from the Americas, and 10 Europeans. And if we're looking at languages, we would find that the language we're going to use all this week is not the most spoken language in the world. In fact, that's Chinese. And the second most spoken language is Spanish. So we can see that there are many languages in the world. If there were 100 people, we would all be speaking those. And we know that in our big cosmopolises, they are all being spoken at once. If the world were 100 people, 86 would be able to read and write, 14 would not. 7 would have a college degree, 40 would have an internet connection. When we think of the basics of life, 1 would be actually dying of starvation, and 11 would be undernourished, and in our modern world, 22 would be overweight. 78 people would have a place to shelter them from wind and rain, but 22 would not. And 91 would have access to safe drinking water, but 9 people would not. If we think about the world as a village of 100 people, and we look at New York City, here is a gallery view of what it would look like. So let me use that as the beginning to introduce to you the reflective practitioners that we've brought to engage with us this week. And I'd like to start by inviting them to introduce themselves by their name, where they're located, and what they're excited about in their work in the city. We'll find this week that we haven't got 100 to be with us, but we have them from all 5 continents. And I imagine if we looked at all of our bios and careers, we will have been to all 7 continents. And we come, though, from around the world. And so I'd just like to ask Rick if he would open up the screen so we could see all of the faces of our reflective practitioners for today. And everybody can turn on their videos. I think that's the trick. Greetings. I see, Raji, that you have my name. So we're actually, we're non-localizing. I don't know if you're able to change the name on your screen to your proper name and your location. See if that works. And at the same time, I hope that I don't disappear. So, Beth, how about I start with you and then I'll call on Stanley. Let's hear from you, Beth. Where are you located and what are you excited about in your work?
Thanks, Marilyn. So my name is Beth Sanders. I live in Edmonton in Western Canada. The work that is exciting for me, and I always think about work as being paid or unpaid. It's the contribution I make to the city, the community around me or beyond. I'm particularly excited right now about opportunities to work with people that are unusual to me, people I don't usually either agree with or spend time with, and practice that. That's what energizes me right now. Thanks, Marilyn.
Okay, Stanley and then Raji. You just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. So I am Stanley. I am sitting in Stockholm, but I am from Zimbabwe. And what is exciting or energizing me in my work right now is the conversations I'm having with different people about how we relate, how we connect with each other, both inside our friendships, inside our families, inside our organizations, and what is the quality of that relationship and what does it bring when we change the quality of relationships, be it in the office, be it in the streets. And we are finding that an ingredient that has been missing in most of the places where we tend to interact, which has not been emphasized for a long time, is love. And when we bring that quality into the relationships, a lot of things transform. It is challenging me to actually explore that every day. And I see that it's a practice. It's a practice for me when I'm alone. It's also a practice for me when I meet with other people, my colleagues at work and the people I meet in my streets. So that's what is exciting for me at the moment.
Thank you, Stanley. Beautiful. Raji and then Honey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raji. I am speaking to you from the city of Colombo in Sri Lanka. So quite a ways away from Stanley. What I'm excited about right now, to be honest, is, well, fingers crossed with the prospect of lockdowns and things declining, I hope, in our part of the world. The prospect of living in my city again is very exciting to me. I'm a teacher, so in terms of a profession, it means actually going out and meeting my students again and engaging in that human contact that I think we all miss. That's part of the passion that I have for the work I do. So that is the fire that is burning currently.
Thank you, Raji. Welcome. Honey and then Patty.
Thank you, Marilyn. My name is Hani Kwan. I am also with Beth in Edmonton, Canada. And there's a couple ways in which I get to activate my contributions to the city of Edmonton, and one of which is taking a cue from Beth, my paid work, which is through capital C City of Edmonton. And there I contribute with a team of bright folks to the affordable housing and homelessness sector here in Edmonton. And what really jazzes me about our work lately is that in the last 10 months or so, the public dialogue has really transformed from the perspective of how many people are now talking about the impacts of something like a global pandemic on those who are most vulnerable and most marginalized in our society. And so we're seeing that there's a whole bunch of opportunity that has presented itself as a result of more and more people starting to understand the role that they have in either contributing or not contributing to the challenges that some of these folks face. So that's what's really getting me excited lately.
Thanks, Honey. Patty and then Jorge.
Good evening, everyone. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and beautiful warm day today, as you can see. I'm particularly excited about the rising voice of Africa into the world and the re-understanding, the relearning of experiencing, not just through the rational, but through another process, through the body, through the heart, that is a different way from the collective, and not just from the individual, but from the collective field. And how that is interpreted into the cities that we live in, the work that we do with my students and with our clients, both in government, higher education, and the corporate arena in regenerating their organizations.
Thank you, Patty. Glad you're here. Jorge
Yes.
and then Andres.
Thanks, Marilyn, and hi, everyone. I'm Jorge, and I'm based in the Jonjage, also known as Montreal, and this is the traditional unceded territory of the Ganyangehaga, the Mohawk people. What excites me about my work today, and I would say the world in general, is just uncertainty. I enjoy navigating through uncertainty. I think this is necessary. That's when we're at our best to really embrace change. And I'm also excited about the countless possibilities for change that we are seeing in different spaces, from urban planning to social justice. So I really can't wait to get moving those pieces.
Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you.
Andres and then Taina.
Hi, everyone. I'm in France, in Nantes, not in Paris. And what I do for a living is I explain to people who are here how people there think and communicate so they can work better together. But really, what really excites me, and the reason why I'm so enthusiastic about being on here, is because I'm looking for ways to find the in groups to speak with the out groups but in ways where we're not claiming anything. We're just sharing together. So basically, how to get a barbecue between the right and the left, And that's the metaphor I can use. So that's why it excites me.
Welcome, Andres. Nice to be with you again. Tina, and then Hugo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Taina, and I come from Finland, Tampere. Tampere is a city, quite a middle in Finland. We have a lot of snow, and I'm waiting for a snowstorm coming here, and let's see how much we get that in Tuesday. I work as a teacher. I teach leaders, adult leaders, and at the school in Lahti, city of Lahti. So I have like 2 cities with me. And what is energizing me and what is exciting me, it's I'm very interested in innovations and startups and startup ecosystems, and how citizens can become entrepreneurs, and how city can help entrepreneurs and startups, and what kind of services and what kind of other benefits cities can provide. So that's me. Nice to have here.
Welcome, Tina. Hugo, and you can introduce your mapping as well, and then it'll be Mark.
Thank you. My name is Hugo Araujo. I come from Mexico City, and right now I'm sitting in Genval in Belgium. And my work here is to listen and to try to map the emerging feeling, the emerging collective feeling into a vortex. So what I did is just to have a second user that is called live vortexing. So you can see there, and you can also explore in the link that I put in the chat. And this is just my best attempt to try to bring this conversation together. So it comes from the heart, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. And Mark.
Hello, my name is Mark McCaffrey, and I'm originally from Colorado, but I live outside of Budapest, Hungary, another landlocked part of the world. And I am really excited about the work I do with ECOS. ECOS is United Nations Community for Education, Communication, and Outreach Stakeholders. It's a group of volunteers around the world that are moving forward efforts to involve, inform, and engage the public to develop adequate responses to climate change. And we are about to launch, actually on Wednesday, a 3-month design charrette process that'll be in a couple of different stages. But if anybody's interested, I'll put a link in the chat window for more information about ECOS and our design charrette. But I'm especially excited about Africa because there is just so much youth enthusiasm and good work going on around building resilience, building capacity in Africa. And we're just really excited to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and we look forward to hearing from you a little after we've had some reflection. I'd just like to put my screen back and share my screen again. I just hold fort. We'll be able to see all these beautiful faces again in a few minutes. But I'd just like to show you a little bit more about what we're positioning ourselves for today. So I just heard from, I think, about 10 or 12 people. And if we see on the screen all of the reflective practitioners that we have invited, we can see that there's going to be a few more that join us later in the week. And there will also be a few of us here that will stay with us and be continuity for us throughout the week. So Hugo has is also going to join us, and Patty will also be able to be with us most of the week. So we welcome you all. I also mentioned that we want any of those of you who've been watching the chat screen, you will know that the chat is lively, and that's been a characteristic of Humanity Wide. And fortunately, I have designed a process so that we will include the chat. Not there's going to be a
Beth, I think we've lost Marilyn. Can you pick that up?
I sure can. Richard, do you have the slide deck on hand?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. You would go
I'm
to
back.
this. Okay,
Back.
she's popped back in. Marilyn, your sound was not very good just before you departed. So let's do a quick sound check.
Okay.
And it sounds,
Okay. Can you hear me?
yes, and it sounds a lot better.
Okay, good. Well, let me see if I can share my screen again. And thank you to the Zoom gods for also being reflective practitioners who help us come along with what we want to share. So I just finished saying that our reflective practitioners are many.
Marilyn, I'd go back a little bit. I think you go back about a minute or two before that. I think that we lost you.
Okay. Okay, I will. Thanks. Thanks, Rick. So our reflective practitioners are many. And you can see from the list on the screen that not everyone who will be with us for the week is with us today. And this is by design. However, there will be several of us, in addition to Beth and myself, who will stay with us as continuity threads throughout the week. Stanley and Patty and Hugo will be with us for most of the days. And then we will have an extra set of reflective practitioners who turn up who have particular interest in the topic for the day. There is also a part 2, because all of us here are the part 1 that will engage for our first 90 minutes. And the second part are you in the chat. As we know, Humanity Rising has a very engaged chat group. And at the end of this session, part 2 will mean that Beth and I, and as many of our reflective practitioners who can fit in their schedule, will join you in part 2 in the chat action group. And we'll have an opportunity to explore some of the ways that we looked at our focus today on activating cities at scale. So there you have it, part 1, part 2. And now let me just tell you how we framed our reflections for today. In Integral City, I work with 5 maps. And if you look at the screen, you go, oh my God, I can't follow any of that. It's too small and it doesn't make any sense to me. Don't worry, we're going to just choose 1 or possibly 2 a day. And we're just going to share with you how that fits in with what we're interested in talking about. So my maps have numbers, and we won't necessarily be sharing them in a consecutive way with you, but in a way that makes sense related to our topic. So today, what we're looking at is in the activation of cities at scale, we want to notice what are our connections. And so we use this map too. I call it a holarchy. It's not a hierarchy, it's a living systems set of holes where we can see the individual is nested into a number of different collectives and groups. So our individuals, and you think about yourself, are part of a family, maybe even a clan, part of a group, a collective, a tribe, part of many organizations, part of communities, part of the city itself, and the city is part of an ecoregion. And when we go right out to the planetary scale, we're all part of the planet. So here we have the map that I would like to speak to today, and that we will do this not by my lecturing, but by engaging our reflective practitioners in looking at what does this mean to them. And we will also then hear from a special focus from Mark on a model that he has that when I saw it, I went, aha, there's some more science behind this model that we need to learn. And so there's map 2. And I think what we need, Beth, is maybe a little bit of reflection because we have called everyone a reflective practitioner in this session. So if we're going to do that, I think we should do a reflective practice. So I invite you to lead us.
Thank you, Marilyn. That makes perfect sense. So this is some reflection time, both for the guests on the panel here with Marilyn and I, and also for everyone in the audience. So if you're listening in on a recording later, you've got lots of flexibility on how much time you have for this. For those listening live in the audience, please jump in and participate with us too. I'm going to ask that for the next few minutes, we resist the urge with our fingers to pull them off the keyboard and resist chatting in the chat, and allow yourselves some spaciousness to relax into some reflection time about your experience of the community, the city that you're in. So we're going to sit here in quite a bit of silence, and I'll guide you through some reflection time. But for those of you listening in, do what works for you. If you'd like to lay down, if you'd like to sit, if you'd like to relocate, if you'd like some music or nature sounds, do whatever works for you. On the call here, Marilyn and I will be offering silence. And we'll start simply with an invitation to settle in to your body. And settle yourself into your body and the space that immediately surrounds you. If you are in a building, notice the walls and the walls around the walls. If you're outside, notice a sense of edge somewhere around you. And while in your body and in the space around you, notice the sounds and the smells. And in this quiet, settled space, notice the rings of awareness around you. You can do this in your mind. You might speak it out loud. You might sing it, draw it, paint it, whatever works for you. What are the rings of awareness around you? What do you notice close in, further out, further out? And notice a space or a place. Could be close in, could be further out, where you feel quite at ease. And what is it about that place where you feel at ease? What are its qualities? And while settled in this space of ease, with great gentleness, notice for yourself a space or a place in your city or your community where you feel a little on edge. And where is that? Is it close in, further out? I'm going to stop speaking just for a minute or two to give you some space to notice about where you feel a little on edge. Ever so gently, if you've drifted away from your body, bring your awareness back to your body, back to the space that's around you, back to your body that you've settled into. And what we'll do now is, audience, notice for yourself what's happened. Feel free to take notes and notice that for yourself. And what we'll shift into now is we'll listen to our guests and their voices about what their experience was like, following which we'll hear from Mark. We've got quite a few people to hear from, so we're going to have some laser beam precision here. And I'll call on each of our guests here to share with us what you notice about your experience of your city, your community around you. What are you aware of? And what do you feel maybe a bit anxious or comfortable with about the city around you? And as I call on each of you, I do not want to police this or regulate it to a high extent, but please, for now, speak for a minute or two and monitor that for yourself, and then we'll move on to Mark and his thing. And just so audience, you know, we're going to do this again. Some time for reflection after we hear from Mark, so that we can embody and breathe in the awareness that is percolating within us. Hanny, if you're okay and you have the option to pass, I'm going to call on you first. And after Hanny, I'll call on Andreas. And what I'm looking for is for you simply remind us where you are on the planet, and what did you notice about your experience, and what makes you feel comfortable or uncomfortable in the city that's around you. Hanny?
Thank you, Beth. So I'm Hanny. I'm in Edmonton in Western Canada, along with Beth again. That was a really, well, for me, I noticed the interesting part of that reflection was how many different places my mind went to, into considering places where I felt at ease and places where I may feel a little on edge. So for me, and I'm thinking again about my work as a civil servant with the city of Edmonton. And I'll start with places that this sort of an idea of places that make me feel a little on edge. Right now, because of the pandemic, our downtown is very much a ghost town. And what we have been hearing reports of, but also, you know, I've experienced myself, is when you go downtown, you don't see the folks who are working. You don't see people who are out getting a bite to eat or a drink. You don't see the kind of foot traffic that we would normally see. And so what's become really plainly obvious to a lot of folks is how many folks who are experiencing homelessness are visible. And this makes a lot of folks feel uncomfortable. And what you end up seeing is so we've had spikes in the numbers of folks who are reporting these kinds of things. So it starts to give downtown a different kind of feel, a different sense of belonging, a different sort of role in our city that's changed a little bit from what it was before the pandemic. And so when I go downtown to work, which I haven't done very much of lately, but when I do go downtown to work, it's very obvious and it's very noticeable. And how people are interacting is also changed. And so that makes me feel a little uneasy, not from the perspective of my personal safety as much as from the perspective of how that important part of our city is changing as a result of the conditions that we're in right now. So that's what came to mind for me for places of unease. Our city has a gorgeous natural river valley system, and myself, and I'm sure the vast majority of folks who live here, love going down to the river valley system for a sense of peace and calm and nature away from the hustle and bustle of city life. So for me, that was one of the first places that came to mind when thinking of a place that, for me, I can feel at peace with. So I'll leave it there for now and let others chat. Thank you. Beth.
Perfect. Thank you, Hani. Andreas, and then I'll call on Raji.
Well, I also live in a city that is in the middle of the longest river in France, and just going off of what Hani said, that's the place where I often ride my bike along the river, and it's a place where I feel, ever since I've come to this town, I look at that river and I feel the current of life moving through it, and so that's where I go to resource. And when I think about the where I'm at an edge is like Henny mentioned, you go into downtown and not the regular people are there. To a certain extent, because we're in lockdown, you're wondering, okay, who is out here and why are they out here, instead of just wondering, well, this is normal, everybody's out here to get a bite to eat or get something to drink. And the more when I talk to people, most of my time I talk to people is like this or on the phone, and we're all I just feel this thirst, this sort of drought of human connection. We are social animals. At the beginning of the pandemic, I used to say I was one, but I'm beginning to hear that more and more. And we need to touch. We need to sit be able to be next to somebody. And now, when I went down the street to just down the block, and somebody was walking on the sidewalk opposite from me, and I could sense a sort of apprehension. We both had masks on, but it wasn't like in the good old days when, oh, somebody's walking down the sidewalk and you don't think anything about it. So, and the last thing I want to say is that I look at the police differently. The police are there. You see the police cars come out all about 7:30 because they're going to enforce the curfew. And the French don't like to be told what to do, and everybody knows that, and that's why the police are there. And it's kind of like they're getting this authoritarian thing is moving in, and I feel like we can lose contact, and that's what I'm getting more and more concerned about.
Thanks, Andreas. Thank you very much, Raji, and then Stanley, please.
Thanks, Beth. Just a couple of points that came up for me. One is very similar actually to what Andreas was referring to. For me, more so that hopefully the serious parts of our lockdown are behind us now, and we're coming back into this phase where we're reintegrating and meeting friends we haven't met for 3 or 4 months before this. And there is always that anxious moment or moments of how do we now interact with those people? We haven't seen them for so long. These are people we hug and kiss and laugh around with. And there is this sense of, is it safe? What is their expectation of how I should behave? What is the correct way that I should behave? Where are we in this spectrum of safety? So that's one thing that occurred to me as Andreas was speaking. The other thing I'd like to quickly touch on, perhaps for another minute, is, as I mentioned before, I live in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and our economy is extremely reliant on tourism. Tourists coming in from Western countries that right now are really struggling with the COVID thing. And so as our airports now open for the first time, in fact, they should have opened last week, if I'm not mistaken, and we've had a few sort of pilot programs of European tourists come in. Our government certainly still hasn't figured out how to do this in the best way, because you're essentially bursting the bubble. We're a very warm society. We encourage all tourists to come and visit, of course, but I have no doubt that is going to cause tension in society, because even with these pilot groups that went to visit certain sites, locals were banned from those sites for those days for safety reasons, but you are creating other very real issues that stem from the stigma of COVID. And in this case, the stigma of COVID coming from abroad. So I'm sure there's a lot to discuss or think about on that, but that's something that certainly popped into my mind. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you, Raji. Stanley, let's go to you. And I just want to quickly interject for the audience right now is while you're listening to our guests here, notice within yourself what observations you share, what are the similarities and differences that can enable you to deepen in your reflection while you listen to these nice minds. Go ahead, Stanley, and then I'll call on Tina.
Thank you, Beth. I always forget to unmute. I am, where my mind went was where I feel at peace is when I'm in the forest. And I happen to be fortunate that I live in a house where I just step out of the door and I'm in the forest. And that I think comes from growing up in a small village in Zimbabwe where I spent most of my time in the forest. So my natural go-to place to relax and be at peace and be at ease is being in nature. And being locked down has also meant that I have more time to be in nature. So that's one of the reflections that I have, to be more in my body, be more in my mind, and be more alone with myself. While I also have, I like to go and meet people. I have a tendency to actually go and meet people whenever there's an opportunity, but not being able to do that has been really a wake-up call to realize that there is this body that is alive and kicking. I need to connect with that body, connect even more. And the places that I found where I'm at unease is when I go into downtown and I go to the subway. I think there is several factors there. One is just the busyness of people going on with their day-to-day activities. I'm not talking about now during lockdown because I'm not going into town right now. But that's a place where I really feel unease, and that's where my mind went. Everyone going about their business, just rushing somewhere and not looking each other in the eye and just being, disconnected, basically. But there's another factor, which is the air, the quality of the air, which is something that affects me immediately. I go into the subway. I feel my body lock down. I feel my body cringe when I go into an atmosphere where the air is not good quality. And so I use that as a metaphor. Like I walk through life when I'm busy at work, as if I'm walking in an area where there's no air or there's no good quality air, and therefore I shut down and the body closes. And I'm not open to interact with other people either when I'm in those situations, and that makes me feel uneasy.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Tina, let's hear from you, and then Jorge. Go ahead, Tina.
Thank you, Beth. What I felt this morning, it was so nice feeling and to hear how silent our city was because of the snow. Because snow, it makes every sounds like more softened. So there was a normal Monday morning traffic, but it was quite nice and it was silent and not that much noise from the traffic. So I was like feeling, yes, this is my space. I like to see my city. It's like everything is like cream. So it's beautiful as well and very silent. What's took me to edge, I think our city of Tampere is quite young, and we are building new tramway, first tramway in our city. So it's quite a big learning step for citizens, and for me it's we need to learn how to walk in city when there is a tramway going, and it's a new phase for this whole city, and sometimes that is quite confusing, and when I see that it's coming, the tramway, it's learning, and they have those lines that they are learning how to drive those tramps. So I think that is something that it's I'm so waiting for, that it's ready and I can jump in, but now I'm just watching it going and trying to learn where not to walk, because the tramway is quite silent too. I cannot hear it when it comes, so I have to, I cannot go like how I used to. And I think those were the first things, and we have what is making me very happy, and what I was thinking, and I was taking myself to our new startup community, Platform 6. It's named by that because we have 5 platforms, so the 6th is for startups. So and I was thinking about those people who are there now, and wishing all the best. So that was what is happening in Tampere.
Thank you.
No, and
Taina?
tramway and startups.
And just for clarity, you're saying tramway, like a little like train transportation in the city?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure I was understanding correctly.
Yeah, tramway. Yeah.
Tramway. Good. Thanks, Taina. Okay, Jorge, and then Patty, please.
Thanks, Beth. So I guess as I was reflecting on the question, I was thinking a lot about social justice, since this was a big topic, not only in the States, but also in Canada. I live in a neighborhood that has become more and more segregated. I live in the eastern part of the neighborhood, and we have, I purposely chose this area because there are more newcomers, people from Northern Africa, South America, Haiti, living here. So that's where I feel at peace. I go to a park just 2 blocks from my house, and that's what I was thinking as we were reflecting on this question. At the same time, the area where I don't feel at peace is within my same neighborhood, toward the western part. And that's simply because I don't think that I'm represented, and that people that live in my area are represented. And I think this is the reality of more and more Canadian cities. With the recent events that happened in the US Capitol, I was looking at people's comments and reactions here, and I think we like to look down on the States and say, oh, it only happens in the States. It actually happens here too. I even feel nervous as I say these things, because I've been told before in public events that I'm not entitled to speak on behalf of Quebec, you know? So systemic racism is something that is happening here a lot. And just before I end, just to show you my neighborhood, this is our neighborhood. The little circles are community activities that are taking place supported by the borough. This thing that I highlighted here, this is where most newcomers live. See how many circles are here? Only 3. And this is the most affordable part of the neighborhood. The rest is really expensive. Rent can be twice as expensive as within our area. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Patty, let's hear from you. And then Hugo, we're going to see the vortexing at the end of the call. So after Patty, Marilyn, I'll go to you to introduce Mark, who will pull on all these threads. Go ahead, Patty.
Thank you. My place of ease was my reflection and my view of this beautiful mountain that is in my front garden of Cape Town. Cape Town is a beautiful, beautiful city. It's a complex city, and South Africa is still a complex country. So my place of ease, I went to the forest. I went into the mountain and up, and the beautiful water is still running down. We have our rainfall in the winter. It's now summer, so the rivers are slowing down, but it's still magnificent to walk in there. What has happened over this lockdown period, more people have come from the outer skirts. So Cape Town is at the base of a long peninsula that is exquisitely beautiful. But because of structural racism in terms of the othering and in terms of the structure of South Africa in apartheid system, the suburbs have been allocated to certain classes, certain people, certain colors of people, and integration is happening. But what has happened in where I felt my edge was as I kind of imagined myself coming through the beauty of the trees and looking out from the mountain onto the surrounding areas around Cape Town. And becoming starkly aware of how much habitation is creeping in onto nature. And I started feeling quite stifled, a little bit scared. It brings up a huge challenge in me because I have such compassion for the conditions of so many of our poor and the results of structural racism that is still in our urban habitats. And while COVID has been here, all the animals have started showing themselves in the nature areas again, and the air has been beautiful. And yet, I can't remember who was, Honey, I think it was you, talking about all the people who don't have homes. So there are so many homeless lying on the streets, and so many people without jobs in our country, so many people with and mostly Black, where the businesses, not only, but where businesses are closed down and the cities are starting to have boarded up signs. So instead of this openness of this beautiful city and the beautiful nature, the conditions of our past and of this crisis we're in at the moment has created a really huge unsettling and brought some of the stark realities right into our face in very many ways. And I struggle to find my breath.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing what's in your heart. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Taina, Stanley, Hanny, Andreas. Who am I missing? Raji. Thank you for all those threads. And we're going to ask Mark to pull on those threads as he shares a way of thinking. And after we hear from Mark, we're going to come back to you, reflective practitioners, for a reaction round on how what you hear and what Mark has to say in your experience of the city. And audience, notice these threads that are really resonating with you. Notice the threads that don't resonate with you or make you feel uncomfortable. Those are all learning edges, and that's what we're here to explore today. So Marilyn, over to you to introduce our friend Mark.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks everyone for your wonderful stories. As you were talking, I was going back to that map too, and I found that we really did talk about all of those levels of the individual connecting with family, groups, organizations, communities, the whole neighborhood, the city, the ecoregion, even as you brought in nature. So I mentioned that I met Mark first in probably late summer 2020, when we were both on a panel with Karen O'Brien's work with You Matter More Than You Think, a book that she has written on really many of the frameworks that we use for Integral City. And Mark shared a map that he calls the Power of 10, or shared a framework for that. And when I saw that, I thought, there is the science behind what I have called the map 2. So Mark and I have discussed a little bit about his work with ecos and his connections with sustainability, looking at climate change. And that was really one of the focuses, I think, for creating the Powers of 10 map. But I wonder, Mark, as you've heard these very personal stories from cities around the world, whether you can see that that map actually gives us what I would think of as an overview of all these stories from the individual right up to the planet, and that it might help us to get beyond what is our personal story and maybe make it a little bit more universal. So Mark, I would invite you to share your model and comment on it, and I know you want to share your screen, so go right ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thank you everyone for being who you are and where you are tonight. for today. It's evening here in Budapest, but I know people are in different parts all over the world, different time zones. And I just wanted to share a couple of ideas that came from some reflections that started at a conference that I went to in 2016 in the Stockholm Resilience Center. And if I can figure out how to turn on the, I have too many screens open right now. We'll start at the beginning. The beginning is always a good place to start, I understand. So I was at a conference at the Stockholm Resilience Center, and we were focused on scaling of sustainable solutions. And we kept using ideas like national scale, community scale, local scale, as if everybody had a shared understanding of what those scales were referring to. And I got a little frustrated because it didn't feel very scientific or precise to me. I mean, we can't help but use the language that we have, but it occurred to me that we could use the 10 orders of magnitude between a single individual and everybody on the planet. You know, we're not quite to 10 billion people yet, but we're getting close. And so over the next 10 minutes, I would like to share about 10 or 11 ideas with you related to this framework that perhaps will be helpful. I think it really overlaps a lot with Marilyn's holarchy model that she shared with us a few minutes ago. But it has to, this powers of 10 map, and I think a lot of these other metaphors and maps that we use really challenge us to be thinking about who do we mean by we when we talk about needing solutions. We need, we need to address climate change. We need to tackle inequality and so forth. But who is this we? And so I would encourage us to be realizing that we occur in all sorts of different scales, and that to be more precise about what we mean by we is really one of the next things we need to focus on. Because if we're talking about Homo sapiens, and I think a lot of the work we're doing actually does have to do specifically with human beings, since we are the geologic force of nature these days, and have been for quite some time, even when there were very few of us. But there's only been about 100 billion Homo sapiens who have ever lived, according to some research, which means that 1 out of every 10 Homo sapiens who ever lived are alive today. And that's kind of mind-boggling to me. And we can actually go back, and it's probably from me back to our earliest Homo sapien ancestors, it's probably around 10,000 generations back, which in the scheme of things is not that far back. Again, that's kind of mind-boggling to me. So again, we're heading towards 10 billion people by the year 2050, according to most estimates. And we have organized ourselves over these 100,000 years or so since we've migrated from Africa into tribes, communities, regions, countries. But of course, all these vary in size. They're all kind of relative. And if we look at the 193, 94 countries that are part of the United Nations, the average size of a country is 38 million. But that's partly because we have a couple of huge countries. The top 5 largest countries in the world, India, China, US, Indonesia, and Pakistan, make up half of the people on the planet and more than half of the carbon emissions. So the median size of a country is actually about 8-9 million. In other words, half the countries in the world are smaller than that. So when we're really focusing on a national scale, we have to acknowledge that a lot of these scales, a lot of these countries are much smaller than that. We have 40 megacities on the planet right now, a megacity being 10 million people or more. And they have a combined population that is more than double the bottom half of the countries on the planet. So in other words, we need to come up with a more precise and scientific way of thinking about these scales. And of course, we've been using powers of 10 in all sorts of different scientific and mathematical applications. We use it in money all the time, you know, dollars on up to billions and trillions of dollars, just as one example. So why not apply this to people, since we can use this 10 orders of magnitude to use as a simple framework. The individual, families, networks, villages, communities, what we call meta communities would be 100,000 people or so, cities, nations, subcontinents, and continents. And I'm going to just very quickly go through these because we've developed this sort of taxonomy, starting with a single individual, and going up 10 would be a family or close friends, the personal network scale. There's a researcher named Robin Dunbar who's done a lot of work around the primates and how primates organize themselves, usually into, at a maximum, about 150 people or so. So that would fit into the scale of personal networks. And then on up, and I'm not going to dwell on each of these, but I think one of the most important scales could be the meta community scale of 100,000 people or so. So that would be on the order of a district in Budapest, like Józsefváros district, where we have an apartment, or the city of Boulder, Colorado, for instance. It's a number of people that can fit into a stadium. And I think in some ways you can call this a global scale. In other words, the sort of convergence of local and global, because it's large, but not ginormous. And it's also small enough that there's some degree of personality to it. And then on up to larger scales, urban scales of 1 million, megacities, or you know, average sized countries or median sized countries of 10 million and so forth, on up to the global scale. And we use this shorthand of P1, P2, on up to P11. And this is one of the figures that we used in a paper that we published in Environmental Research Letters recently, which uses the same powers of 10 framework, but also shows how these different organizations and systems and structures that we've invented that are human and essentially human inventions. Some of them may span several scales. You know, some families are much larger than others. Some communities are much larger than others. Some countries are much larger than others. But I think one of the values of this particular figure is that it shows kind of the entangled relationships and how there is a certain degree of chaos and complexity. But as was mentioned earlier, it's possible that if we can sort of harness our superpowers of fractal scaling, we can have a better sense of how to, you know, not be overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, and actually be able to work with it and play with it in a more effective way. So again, this is an initial taxonomy that I would invite you all to critique and think about. There's certainly, this is sort of an idea that we would love to have feedback on. So again, with the first 5 scales or so being something of a local scale, and then the next 5 being more of a global scale, with this overlap of around the 100,000. And then of course, if we want to invite all humans who have ever lived, all Homo sapiens, that is, that's another order of magnitude above and beyond that. So when we first started exploring this, we had this theory that there would be a sweet spot somewhere in the middle, around 100,000 people. And to kind of test that out, a group of us took data from Project Drawdown, which I think some of you may be familiar with. And they had done this in-depth analysis of around 100 different climate interventions to reduce greenhouse gases or sequester carbon. And what we did is we looked at each one of them and determined what is the range that they could be best implemented at. And of course, some like rooftop solar, you can do that on a single house, on up to in a large apartment complex or something like that. And so then we took the median point as sort of the sweet spot for each of these. And what we found is that there is something of a critical mass of agency that is, again, somewhere in the middle. We all have individual agency to greater or lesser extent. When we have collective agency, we can really get things done. And then there's also proxy agency where we are, or others are able to make decisions or make choices, take action for us. And we can do that for others as well. I think those of you who are city planners and so forth, you are in effect providing proxy agency for your communities. So once again, kind of focusing on this local scale where the local and global kind of converge is where we think the action is, because according to our analysis of project drawdown data, the greatest number of interventions, the highest amount of greenhouse gases that can be reduced, and the greatest amount of money that can be benefited is really at this community to urban scale between 10,000 and 1 million people, and especially around the 100,000 and 10,000 scale. So in any event, this is just a framework I wanted to share with you all to reflect on. You are the sweet spot right there in the middle. And just to remind us all that this is a very kind of anthropocentric point of view, obviously, and that beyond Homo sapiens, clearly, even though this framework may be helpful for us thinking about who we are in a somewhat different new light, we also have to acknowledge that we are not separate from and intricately connected to everything else, the black holes, the stardust, and the emptiness of the universe. So I think with that, I would like to invite you to be in touch with me if you have any questions or comments, and I'd be happy to share more information with you offline about ECOS and some of the work that we're doing. So thanks very much, Marilyn and Beth, for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for tying in so gracefully the way that we can see this very big picture and the agency that we all have the capacity to connect through. And that is always what struck me about MAP 2, and why did we start there in our discussion in looking at cities rising for a regenerative world. It's because we are all interconnected through the city, just through those different groups and collectives that we belong to. And I felt that Mark's wonderful research here could give us even more of an impulse, a motivation to see that there are ways that we can make a difference. I'm very curious from the stories that you've told what your reactions are when you see that map. And I'm going to just check with Beth, because we have got to manage our time a little bit differently than we had planned here. So maybe I could just ask for a few people who have a resonance with what Mark just shared and their own work, that we could have that way of circling around, and we'll then hear from Hugo. Does that make sense to you, Beth?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think a reaction round from our reflective practitioners, when you hear what Mark just offered, what does that mean for you in the contributions you're making, or how you navigate the city around you? And go ahead, Jorge.
Beth, may I?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, should I go or?
Okay, I'm going to jump in. Jorge, and then Raji, please. And
Okay,
just a
thanks.
30-second headline.
Okay, awesome. I'm thinking about the scales for enabling social change. This is what I'm thinking. I'm not going to go into detail just to respect the time, but that's what came to my mind.
Go ahead, Raji.
Thanks, Beth. Very quickly, just looking at the various different we's that we looked at. Not to be a buzzkill, but you know, one of the things I spoke about earlier was this division that is being created, a different categorization of we's as COVID comes into the picture more and more. We have locals versus tourists, like I described. In the future, we're going to have vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. We're going to have local sort of smaller communities versus the richer communities that have the resources to get the vaccines or to be quarantined in nicer places than the local people are being quarantined in. So this is something that popped into my head, which I haven't really, you know, fully realized, but this was something that jumped to my mind when the presentation was going on. So thanks.
We do not expect today that your reflection be complete and crystallized. So this is absolutely perfect, Raji. Absolutely perfect. Just you're identifying the seeds of tension that are on the ground in real life in our communities that we live with, we can't avoid. And when not explored, they catch us up. So the opportunity before us is always to explore what are those tensions. I want to check in quickly with any of our other reflective practitioners if there's something you'd like to call. I'm going to check in on Hani.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I want to continue Raji's thread about tension. I think in cities, very oftentimes, from a limited perspective, we're challenged to figure out how we all can peacefully coexist with such a diverse range and volume of personal interests. And so I think what COVID has done for us is really highlighted the tension between agency and action and permission via formal and informal social contracts. So that's kind of what twigged for me listening to Mark speak about, especially about critical mass.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Hani. Quick check-in with other reflective practitioners. I'm gonna check with Hugo right now just to walk us through super briefly what this vortex thing is that you've got going on, and then I'm going to shift into closing us off. And while Hugo is getting that set up, I want to have folks look at the chat because Stanley has posted in the links for anyone who wants to keep going and percolating with each other rather than just watching us. And Marilyn and I and some other of the guest panelists here will join you to be in conversation, to be in community with each other. So please check the chat check the chat for the link for that. Hugo, let's hear from you and then I'll close us off.
Yeah, thank you. So what I've been hearing for me is that two poles of the conversation. So one pole comes on the comfortable part, and the other pole comes on the uncomfortable. But what we really want to achieve is this idea of cities actually being as a living organ of the planet. So I think I've been hearing that we are all kind of these unusual people, but we have so many things in common. So we love, we have dialogues, we experience, we are human beings. We deal with uncertainty. We have a local scale. We do deal with entangled relations, and we share the place and the territory that we live in. So when I go to uncomfortable part, it goes more into construction, economy, power, systemic racism, downtown. Now we are social animals, and the lockdown is actually killing this part of in our own self. So homeless and ghost towns. If I go to the comfortable part, then I go into nature, water, self-connection, and finding peace. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't be listening more into nature in general, because the cities that we're living, the problems comes in the way that we implement our way of being. So maybe at some point we should quiet our cleverness and start listening what actually makes us feel comfortable and bring more from this into the center. So this is what we are proposing, I think, as a collective. This idea also on evolutionary systems, reflective organ, well-being, and heart. So I think by pulling connections in between those two parts and bringing this one as a bridge, we can do it better. Just from my biomimicry practitioner perspective, we need to take care of the scale. Nature doesn't scale as we do in business. Nature scale in a different pace. So sometimes it is also about the right pace. Thank you.
Great, thank you. What a lovely mirror, another layer of reflection on the conversation we're having. Quick question and in the chat, I think it was from Stanley. Has anyone told us why there's a Q in activating? The quick answer is in the integral model, AQual, all quadrants. So we're going to dig into this later this week when we look at the 4 quadrants. So that's a quick answer. Marilyn and I will be in the conversation after this call, and we're happy to explore all those sorts of questions and others. What I most appreciate about today and the last 90 minutes is the willingness of our guests to explore publicly and name some of the edges that they're finding themselves sitting in their experience of the communities around them. One of the things that I've learned is that knowing those edges and knowing the tension and accepting the tension that's in our city, resist the urge to fix anything, but rather explore the tension because it's there, because it compels us to grow and improve. And that is a force that regenerates our cities. Thank you, Mark, for bringing the lens of scale. One of the things that's been important to Marilyn and I in our work is it doesn't matter what scale we're working at, we influence and shape our cities and vice versa. So that's a useful lens. Tomorrow, we're going to build on today and look at cities as systems that are complex adaptive systems. And we will look at one of Marilyn's maps, which is the Q in activating the 4 quadrants and 4 voices. And we're also going to look at the competing value systems that are in the city. So please join us tomorrow if you'd like to continue the Cities Rising journey. We'll be here every day this week. And please, if you're compelled, join the chat. Stanley's been dropping in the links. They have been organizing something rather new and spectacular for the Humanity Rising community to experience each other and see each other. And one of the things that I've learned as a community to be stronger, it must be in contact with each other. That's what's happening in the next 90 minutes. So thank you to the chat action group for organizing that. That's all I have to say. Jim, I think we're over to you for the last words.
Perfect, Beth. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you all for a splendid opening to 2021 on Humanity Rising. 2 quick comments. Just to underscore what Beth said, it was wonderful to open looking at the irritants of how we're experiencing our communities. And the image that was coming to my mind, Beth, and all of you as you were talking, was that of an oyster. You know, it's the irritant in the oyster that produces the pearl. And it's the capacity, I think, of holistic, coherent communities to identify an irritant and not get polarized and divided, but to come together to solve it in a creative and potentiated way. Because when you find that irritant, you're also finding potential conflict. And it's kind of the genius of the oyster that it can find that little grain of sand that's irritating it. And instead of expelling it, turns it into a pearl. I mean, that's an extraordinary metaphor with which to open our years. So thank you all and Beth for underscoring that. And then secondly, I want to take up the observation, Mark, that you made. It's inspiring to me that there have been 100 billion human beings and we're generation 10,000, plus or minus. But I think it couldn't be a more, again, potentiated image for all of us to carry as we move into the most crucial generation in the history of this 100 billion people and these 10,000 generations, to know that in terms of the power of 10, which is such a profound part of the sacred geometry and the sacred numerology of how the universe is constructed, that we are generation 10,000. So I just invite everyone to breathe deep into that possibility that it's the 10,000th generation that is going to save the day. And the initial traction point is probably going to be the cities where most of us live. So thank you, everyone. We'll continue this dialogue with Marilyn and Beth and the team tomorrow. Again, same time, same station, 5:00 p.m. Central European time here on Humanity Rising. Great opening session. Love it. Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.